Okay, this is gonna be a fun one. I think it's gonna be an interesting one. Let's start off with some fundamental basic questions, just so that we can get everyone on the same page about what we're talking about. So let's start with a functional definition. What is imposter syndrome? Yeah, tell me what you kind of learned and what you thought about as you kind of look at that question.
So I guess the term imposter syndrome, when I did a little bit of research, first came up in the 1970s. A psychologist named Pauline Rose Clance just coined the term.
Classic Pauline.
Yeah, exactly. Classic Pauline. But I mean, the gist of it is basically feeling like underqualified or like an imposter or fraud in a whatever position or role that you're in.
Yeah. So. That's what I found too. And I actually found like a synonym for it is fraud syndrome, which personally for me, I actually, for whatever reason, that communicates more about what it actually is to me. And you know, as I was kind of reading about it, researching it, thinking about my own experience with it, it's like, what are the feelings and patterns associated with imposter syndrome? It's this idea that like, man, my setbacks, mistakes, or failures are always because of me, but my successes never are, right? It's like nothing I experience that's good ever has anything of me in it, right? It's always luck. And then really just maybe this like pervading sense of like, I'm a fraud and I'm going to be found out. Like this entire thing that I'm building, regardless of what that thing is, your life, your business, your marriage, whatever, is a house of cards and it's going to come falling down eventually. Anything else you'd add just for people to understand like what we're talking about and what imposter syndrome is?
Yeah. I mean, I think I created my own definition for imposter syndrome, but it points more to the...
Ben, are you qualified to do that?
Probably not,
yeah.
but you know, we're going to...
Well, that's a very imposter syndrome question is to ask if you're qualified. Yeah. Okay, what you got?
So I said imposter syndrome is an integrity deficiency and not necessarily integrity of character, but if integrity is being, at its most basic definition, wholeness, imposter syndrome would be like the facts of your life not lining up with how you internally feel. So.
Yeah, man, I think you're already alluding to some of what we're going to get into in this episode. I also think it's helpful to mention that, at least from what I found, as of 2019, imposter syndrome was not a recognized psychiatric disorder. And I couldn't find anything that suggests that since 2019 it has become a recognized psychiatric disorder. And so that's not to say it shouldn't be talked about and shouldn't be discussed. I actually think it should be discussed because everything that I saw in terms of data has suggested that the use of this term and phrase has skyrocketed, particularly over the course of the past 10 years. Like literally one of the articles I read said like use of the term imposter syndrome has exploded in the last 10 years. And so whether it's, you know, been scientifically studied to the degree that the American Psychiatric Association has declared it an actual thing, data is still out on that, but it is something that anecdotally kind of the zeitgeist is recognizing it as like, this is something that people experience. And so therefore we're going to keep talking about it. But I also think it's why it's, as believers, as people that want to lead with wisdom, as people that want to influence other people in a positive and healthy way, it's why it's something that's good to maybe be spending some time talking about and being really intentional about how we think about it, because the jury's still out on how we respond to this thing, what this thing actually is. And I think there are unhealthy and healthy ways to respond to it. So with that, let's go to the second kind of big fundamental question. Let's start with just personal experience. Give us some examples. Like, where have you seen this play out for yourself?
It's a good question. I think, well, I brought this up as a podcast conversation because I think there are multiple areas where I have felt imposter syndrome. One of the really clear ones I think that was interesting to navigate through was when I was in the Coast Guard. And, you know, I spent 2 years training for rescue swimmer school. And then you go to rescue swimmer school. It's 6 months long. But when you graduate, when you finally make it through, you're not a rescue swimmer yet. You have to get qualified before you actually earn your wings. And so there's this like, just constant impending sort of, I'm not quite there, I'm not quite there, I'm not quite there. And then one day you wake up and, you know, you get qualified, you get to your unit, you go through all the flights, the syllabus, you get your EMT cert. And I just remember on the back side of it being like, okay, I guess I've made it. Like I'm here. And then, you know, you have your first, I had my first case And just after the fact, just reflecting on it and being like, did that like really just happen? Like I just pulled a dude out of the woods. Like, am I qualified to do that? Like, I guess on paper, yes. And like, but just feeling a little bit like when the reality of you being the sole person going down to help someone in a situation like that actually hit me. I was like, oh wow, yeah. Like I had this goal, and then I've arrived, and I don't necessarily, I know I'm equipped to do this, but something internally with me felt a little bit off. Like it felt like I was like, oh, this, do I belong here? You know?
Yeah. And I think that really highlights the dissonance that occurs, because my guess is you would have looked at anyone else that had walked through the process that you had walked through to become a member of the Coast Guard, to be able to go on missions like that. And if you knew the process they walked through, if you knew the intentionality, diligence, hard work that they applied to go through all that, and you knew that they were certified, and I asked you objectively, Ben, are they qualified to be able to do this? Well, what would your answer have been?
Yes. Yeah. And I worked with like 13 of them, right?
Yeah, and like no doubt they are qualified.
Yep.
But me, myself, like there's something like, I don't know if I'm qualified though.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I had 3 areas that I think I've really experienced this, particularly in the last 5 years. It would be imposter syndrome as it relates to success, imposter syndrome as it relates to freedom, and imposter syndrome as it relates to teaching or communicating. And so success, the story that came to mind, which I don't know if I've shared this in the podcast before. So left my full-time job to start the business. Business was going well. Probably about 8 months in, I was going to Nashville, and I was like, man, it seemed like the exit went really well. Like they were so supportive. I was just like, I wonder if Dave would be willing to sit down. And just like, I have a lot of questions now that I didn't even know to ask 8 months ago about running a business that I mean, if I have a connection to Dave Ramsey, who's like probably one of the most prolific teachers on business and leadership right now, like why wouldn't I send the email? So I sent him an email, and I remember clicking send, being like, will he answer this? And immediately response came back, and he said, Alex, like would love to sit down with you. Why don't we do it at the office? Let me know if there's any other leaders in the organization you would like to be there, and like looking forward to it.
Wow.
So gracious, so awesome. And so I got to the office, and literally like bourbon, wine, charcuterie board. Like it was like, this is insane. Like just unbelievably like abundance minded, gracious, all of that. And so we had a great conversation. How this ties into this topic is, eventually he asked me like, give me an update on how the business is going, and kind of like what things are looking like. And I said, I think things are going well. I said, we've made it past a 6-month like kind of benchmark with a lot of our first customers. And I said, like, we kind of, whenever they signed up for an initial 6 months. It was like they were opting in for a 6-month process to ensure growth of their business and their personal life and all of that. And I said, we just passed that, and everyone like re-upped. And he like immediately like interjected and said, man, that's so good. Like that means that you're providing something that's really, really valuable and well done. And my response to that was, yeah, I hope that's the case. And he stopped me and he said, what do you mean you hope that's the case? Like, it's not, I hope that's the case. He's like, that is the case. That's why they're paying you. Like, it is valuable. And like, that was just such a click moment for me, where it was like, oh, like factually, like it's not an opinion whether or not it's valuable. It's like factually, people said, I want to continue paying you for what you're doing for me and our business right now. And he was not really trying to boost my self-esteem at all in that moment. All he was doing was saying like, look at the fact.
Just reality.
Exactly. So the second one, and I'll go through the second 2 pretty quick. Freedom. I remember in the first year of business, it's like, I felt this need to work till 4 p.m. And like, if I, like on paper, I could absolutely, wrap up what I needed to for the day and go for a 2-hour run if I wanted to at 2 p.m. Right. But man, if I did that, I would not feel okay. And it was like, I don't deserve this free. Like I can't be allowed to do this right now. And so freedom. And then number 3 is teaching. For the first couple of live events that we hosted, I've been speaking and teaching for a long time, right? Like, 15 years, maybe longer than that. But for the first live event that we hosted ourselves, I remember like I was like cramming content in and I was like changing it up till the last minute because I was like, people are paying to come see me teach. And I don't feel like what I do is not good enough for people to come pay to see. And like, I have to change who I am, and I have to change my typical process for doing this to meet those demands. And I've never really thought about that as imposter syndrome until we were kind of working on this content. But I think those are all examples of it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay, so now let's go into where have you seen it play out for others, the imposter syndrome, maybe particularly in leadership roles.
I think I could pull up specific examples, or I guess point to themes. Like, and I think when I was thinking about the different examples that I've seen in work and working for people, and I think it can manifest in different ways. But I would argue that the root of imposter syndrome is actually pride. And often like how that looks is there's either like an easily marked level of like low self-esteem or like false humility involved, or on the flip side of that, there is like an exceptional amount of peacocking and like, look at me, visibility, like let me inflate this image of who I am so that other people respect me. But I would say that like because you never can really know unless they verbalize that like those are the thoughts that someone is having, right? You can only project or maybe have some intuition that someone is going through something like this. But I would say that those things look like, in my opinion and from my own life, evidence of imposter syndrome or like not feeling like you're enough.
Yeah, man, I'm so excited to get into the exploration of this conversation too, because I think there's healthy and unhealthy ways to respond to it for sure. From like a practical standpoint, by far the most common way that I see it play out for leaders is like they gain the role of CEO, but they can't step into that role, right? There's a gentleman that I love and respect the guy so much. He owns an HVAC company, and we have done work with him now for, I think, 2 years. And he was telling me recently at one of our in-person events, he told me, he said, Alex, like the first event that I came to with y'all was so hard because I literally could not see myself not in the truck fixing people's HVAC system. Like he's like, he's like, you didn't mention HVAC the entire event. And he's like, that's the only way I see myself as it relates to the company. He's like, and I know I'm a business owner and I know technically my business card says CEO, but he said like, I did not see myself that way. And so I never acted that way. And he said that first event was the first time ever. He said, I certainly wasn't convinced, but he said like it caused me to ask the question, could I be that? And then he just told me how honestly, he actually, he like gave us a lot of credit that he shouldn't have given us because it was him in so many ways. He thanked us for being so patient with him. And it's like, dude, the patience is really on you just to keep chipping away. And he just talked about how uncomfortable it was for him to do so many new things over the course of really a year and a half to start playing the role of CEO. But he said, like, Alex, now I get to see you here 2 years later. He's like, I'm doing it. He's like, I'm doing so many of the things 2 years ago that were literally foreign to me that he said before that event, I would have said I could have never done this. And it was his way of viewing himself had shifted. And in some ways, he viewed himself now with much more of a growth mindset than a fixed mindset. I think imposter syndrome is often rooted in a fixed mindset where it's like, this is who I am, this is who I will always be. Yep. And me doing anything different represents me stepping outside the identity of who I actually am. Yep. When in reality, we're all created for growth and to move into new things. But again, the thing that we're going to step into is how do you do that in a way that's healthy versus unhealthy? Yeah,
man, I think that example itself, like you talked about his view of himself. And I mean, earlier I mentioned like this being an integrity deficiency, right? Mm-hmm. Like the facts of your life and what is being externally projected doesn't align with how you feel about yourself. And so there's a disconnect there. And I think you're right. I think the answer is like reflecting on who are we created to be? Who did God create us to be? And through that, like who is God and how does that affect the way in which we interact with ourselves and the world around us.
That's right. It's so funny, the unique seat that we get on the bus of being the facilitator of a community of leaders, right? One of the things that we've done since we started the company was we now do them 3 times a week, these office hours calls that are community coaching calls for leaders. And what's interesting is like, especially at the beginning of the company, like I was on all of those calls with all of those leaders. And then I was also talking to a lot of them individually. And what was so cool is so many of them individually would articulate to me like, man, those calls are so valuable. I'm so grateful for those calls. And then like every single one of them individually would say the same thing to me. They would all say like, everyone on those calls is just so smart and I just don't feel qualified to be on that. And it's like, and they would mention specific people who were so smart. I'd be like, they said the exact same thing about you to me. Like literally this is a call of 10 people and no one out of the 10 people feels qualified to be on this call, which is like, so who's qualified to be on this call? And it again just highlights, for me, it opened my eyes to how irrational this can be. And irrationality is an unwise leadership practice. And so that kind of gets us into the final kind of fundamental base level question. Why is this topic so critical for anyone with leadership responsibility from your perspective?
A verse came to mind when I was thinking about this topic, and just the thought of integrity and wholeness and alignment in your thinking and the world around you. And it was James 1, 5-8 says, now if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith without doubting, for the doubter is like the surging sea, driven and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, being double-minded and unstable in his ways. And I think the big thing as to why it's important for leaders is that like being double-minded or not being aligned in who you are, where you're going, and just the purpose for your life is going to create a ton of instability in how you navigate your personal life. And also like it's going to have a insurmountable effect on the way that you lead and the impact that you have on other people.
I think that's so well said. And I mean, I think it's literally later in that chapter that he says like, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, which I also think is like an imposter syndrome. Like I think you will, and I would even say you should experience imposter syndrome if there's things that you hold up as ideals and standards that you're not doing, right? And so in some ways it's like, to engage in this with a healthy way, we better also monitor ourselves, which is like, am I living in alignment with the standards that I supposedly hold for whether it's leadership or my faith or things like that? Maybe from a different vein, I think it's really critical for leaders because what do we always say leadership is? Leadership is helping people go from here to there. And that means as a leader, part of your responsibility is to lead others in the taking of new territory. You are charged with the opportunity, but also the responsibility of stepping into things that are new, that are different, that are creative, that are chaotic, that are unknown, and kind of bushwhacking and figuring out the path where one does not currently exist. And I have never once in my life individually or in my leadership gone further than I've ever gone and ever felt fully confident that this is where I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
I've never felt that way, right? Yep. I don't know if you've ever seen there's that meme of the Lord of the Rings. There's a we need to pause right now and go watch that movie for your spiritual growth. So in the Fellowship of the Ring, like Sam pauses at one moment and Frodo like looks back and he's like, why have you stopped? What's going on? And he goes, if I take one more step, it will be the furthest that I've ever been. And there's memes that basically suggest that every step he takes from that moment, he says the same thing. It's like, that's never not true once you go past the furthest you've ever been. Yeah. And that's what leadership feels like, right? And so I think it's reasonable to say if you are leading, you're taking new territory. And if you're taking new territory, then you should anticipate there will be times where you question whether or not you are supposed to be where you are. And the way you respond to that is critically important.
Yeah. What is the difference between healthy growth and pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone and proving yourself or operating from a position of imposter syndrome where you're just trying to catch up to or perform in a way.
So now it feels like we're getting into the exploration of this topic.
Yeah.
Really. As I was kind of thinking about it, what I feel like is like what responses to the feeling of like, I'm not supposed to be there, I'm not qualified for this. In some ways, like the fact that I have the role of CEO isn't correct, even though I'm playing that role, right? Like, what are the responses to those that are healthy? Well, I think that the response to that is healthy is always going to be grounded and anchored in truth. And that could be facts, like what Dave did for me, is he literally said, like, there are facts that you are not paying attention to. And like, the facts will help tell the story. Or that can be grounded and anchored in spiritual truth, I think. And I spent some time writing down some spiritual truths. But before we get to those, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. But in some ways, imposter syndrome is a feeling. And the minute you follow your feelings, well, that's probably unhealthy. We should say, how does this feeling align with the facts? I think is the primary thing that we have to do to discriminate between healthy and unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. I would just agree.
I love it when people
not to
say
be
that.
An echo chamber here, but I think the existence of imposter syndrome is evidence that your feelings do not align with what God says about you, what God says about himself in the world, and then also just the straight up facts of your life.
And so unhealthy as it relates to imposter syndrome. So if I'm feeling like, hey, I can't be doing this, I'm not enough to be doing this, like who am I to experience this success or to have this freedom or things like that? What is unhealthy response to those feelings? I think it's untruth is what I wrote down. And the reason why I wrote untruth is because a lot of times to me, it feels a lot more subversive than just lies, right? The language that I feel is like lies are just bold on their face, not true. Untruth is this, like, it might have a glimmer of truth to it, but there's something that's off. There's something that's not correct. And so it could be three things, I think. Number one is not acknowledging facts and perpetuating feelings of fraudulence. So you're saying like, man, I can't be the CEO of this company. Well, you are, and you have been for the past 2 years, and the company has even grown for the past 2 years. So who's to say you can't be? Like, that's actually not factually true. And the more you tell yourself that, the more you're perpetuating that, right? Or like, I can't go for a run at 2 p.m., right? And take off work, right? It's like, well, you can. That's literally not true that you can't. And not only can you, you have. And when you have, the business hasn't fallen apart. So again, it's when we start to not acknowledge or even deny factual evidence and retell ourselves the story. And I am so far from a neuroscientist, it's not even funny. But what I know to be true is neuroplasticity is a thing.
Yeah.
And the more we repeat thoughts and narratives to ourselves, the easier it is for us to go to that neural pathway. And that's where we start to write new facts for ourselves that are literally not true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the most effective, if not, I mean, it might be the most effective talk therapy, like most studied, most proven. And a step in cognitive behavioral therapy is thinking errors. Being able to identify thinking errors in your thinking, where they come from, and then how that affects your like view of yourself consistently. And so obviously the end result of CBT, or the goal, is to correct those thinking errors in a way that affects your view of yourself.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that is not dissimilar from the reason why one of our 5 coaching qualities that we train all of our coaches on is curiosity. And one of the questions that I find myself asking a lot is that true? Like, is just literally repeating back to someone what they say and asking them, is that true? Because what I often see, especially with leader types, type A, driven, ambitious, they say, I never, I can't, I won't, I'm not able to. And it's such a gift to be able to reflect that back to them and be like, you said you've never been able to effectively manage someone over time. Is that true? And then they'll like start backpedaling, like, well, that's not fully true. And you start to see their entire disposition change, because it's like, if that is true, man, this is going to suck for you. But the minute you realize like, oh, that generalization that I've been telling myself is not at all true, it's wild how your entire outlook changes.
Yeah.
And so the first example of untruth that I gave was not acknowledging facts and therefore perpetuating feelings of fraudulence. Number 2 is operating from a posture of self-sufficiency and total adequacy. So this is the other end of the spectrum, where you say, man, I feel like a fraud. And so what you do is you say, I feel like I'm not enough. That's not true. I am enough. I just need to stand in front of the mirror for 10 minutes every single morning and tell myself, I'm a $5 million CEO of a business. I am amazing. The world just hasn't recognized it yet. Everyone just needs to see it. And I feel like I'm saying this in a joking way. This is like very seriously what people are recommending people do right now.
Just a big, healthy dose of toxic positivity.
Dude, and self-talk, right?
Yeah.
And so positive psychology was, I believe it was really, really popularized in the 70s and 80s. And it was a whole vein of psychology, right? Obviously, I believe in the power of positive thinking, but it can get taken too far. And it did get taken too far. And one of the lies associated with the positive psychology movement was it literally advised therapists to allow people to live with the lie and let the lie be their umbrella.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like literally hold the lie over you and that will shelter you from life's storms. And it's like, well, eventually a hurricane will come and your umbrella is not going to work very well in a hurricane. The truth always catches up to you. And so the idea that we need to actively deny these feelings when some of them could be true. Like some of them could be like, wow, I am not equipped to do this. Like in some ways, I told our team recently, like we are on track to being a $2 million company. Praise God. That's amazing, right? I have never run a $2 million company before. Right? I have not. And somehow I look up and it's like, that's what I'm charged with right now. You better believe there's feelings of inadequacy. And some of those need to be rooted out because they're not factual. Some of those are probably true. Like I probably need to get better in some things as a leader, as a business mind, as a person that's able to manage family and business at the same time, right? There's probably some areas where I am inadequate to the task, but the good news is I'm not a fixed person. I can grow.
Yeah.
But to deny those things is actually going to be the thing that keeps me in a fixed spot, I think.
Yeah. Well, because if imposter syndrome is being disconnected, your feelings are disconnected from reality. Like the flip side of that, having a ton of positivity that isn't necessarily still aligned with reality, like the issue still exists there. It hasn't been solved.
That's right. Yes, exactly. And so then the final one that I would say is you're not acknowledging spiritual truths that enable you to do new things by faith. So you could say you're not acknowledging the facts, or you could say you are completely denying facts that suggest that there is some inadequacy, or you're saying, hey, I'm inadequate, and you do acknowledge that I'm inadequate to the task at hand, but you're not looking at the spiritual truths that challenge us to walk by faith and suggest that faith is, the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And our faith tells us, like, there are spiritual truths that say you can do things that you have not done before. And in some ways, that is a core theme of the entire Bible, is people stepping into new territory by faith before they knew what the result was going to be, and trusting that the result wasn't all on them.
Yeah.
But when we deny those spiritual realities, and I have a list of them that I'd like for us to walk through, but when we deny those spiritual realities, we are perpetuating unhealthy untruth in our lives.
Yeah, man, you want evidence in the Bible, just pick up Hebrews 11. Just read.
Yeah. The hall of faith is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, just like all of those people, when you go back and you read the stories, had some pretty big shortcomings. And regardless, like God called them into mission, into purpose, into fulfillment.
And I mean, let's think about like a primary one, Moses, right? God speaks to Moses through the burning bush. And one of Moses' first responses is basically like, you've got the wrong guy.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, you clearly don't know me. I'm not eloquent in words. I have a checkered past, to say the least. Like, I don't think I'm your guy. And God's response to that is anger, which is interesting because I think it hits on what you said. Is it's like Moses is literally making it about himself, and God is saying, like, you think this is about you?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not making, like, I'm telling you I'm going to do this, and I've chosen to use you, and I'm not, quite frankly, not asking you about your opinion of your qualifications in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's a subversive form of pride.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and you could look at it and be like, "Oh, I'm not qualified to do that. I can't be used by God in that way." And we could literally look at that and slap the tag of humility on that. But when you actually think about it, it's like he is way giving himself disproportional influence over outcomes, and not at all trusting in God's actual sovereignty over outcomes. So the spiritual truths that I think we have to be anchored in to handle this in a healthy way. We just talked about one. God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called, right? I mean, outside of Jesus, I can't think of a single person that, like, in the Bible that it's like, oh man, they had their act together and that's why God picked them. Like, nope, not at all. God gives and God takes away, right? So again, I think this is a diversion, or this is where I think spiritual truth can deviate from pop culture's conception of imposter syndrome. Is I think pop culture's interpretation of imposter syndrome and how to respond to it is like, you call your successes luck. Those aren't luck. You created those. That was all you. And I think spiritual truth suggests that it's like, it was not luck, but it also was not all you. You were the vessel that God chose to participate in the process, but God did the thing. God gives the blessing and he takes it away. A few more. God's power and strength are magnified in our weakness is a spiritual truth that we should remember that. So that's why it's so crucial that we don't deny our weakness. And then another one that I think is worth hitting on is that God accomplishes his ends in and through people. And that is just true, right? Like, if you read the Bible, it's like, it's very rarely, if ever, God choosing to do things in the world divorced from any human involvement at all. It's always in and through people. And so he's going to choose to use someone. And it's like, if he's going to use someone, why could not that person be you in certain situations? And then finally, true confidence is not rooted in human ability or achievement, but in God's sovereignty. Which I think we could talk more about that, because I think we're really discussing confidence here and where true confidence comes from. But yeah, are there any other spiritual truths that you think people need to be grounded in, or any thoughts that you have on those ones that I just shared?
I think you covered a lot of them. One of the ones that stuck out to me, the last one, and then also related to people, I guess pop culture's posture being like, oh, you created this, like you caused this. This was the work that you put in. The reality that we can till the soil, but like God provides the rain, right? And God is the one who's actually going to, he created a world in which when we work, growth can happen. But like, there's a huge divide between what the world says the solution to imposter syndrome would be there and what scripture says.
Yeah. I actually heard a quote, gosh, it was this past week, that was from an older missionary, and the book, it was John Piper's Desiring God, was talking about how lots of times people deeply mischaracterize this quote. The quote is, expect great things from God, attempt great things for God. And the idea is, how would you live if you actually believed that the God of the entire universe, who's sovereignly in control of everything, loved you, cared for you, knew what was best for you, and was actively working to see it come to pass? Like, how would you live if you knew that was true? You should expect God to do great things, because that is in the character of who he is. And then attempt great things for God. A lot of what people distort that into is I'm going to go independently do great things for God. What this was actually saying is put yourself in positions and situations proactively where you can't do anything but lean on him, where you know just how much you need him, because on your own power, this is absolutely not possible. And I thought that was such a good leadership statement of like, man, we live in such a time where we're challenged to grow, move forward, take risks, but in some ways it's like we're challenged to do that on our own power. And what this is saying is like, that's a failing, worthless strategy, is do things that you can't do on your own power to such a degree that you have to lean and depend on God.
I mean, that really just goes back on the idea of pride, right? Mm-hmm. Like having a right view of who God is and how he works and how he created the world to be is gonna like correct everything else. If you have a right view of who God is.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that like one of the other stories that I think of, because we're now talking about confidence, I think one of the best displays of confidence in the Old Testament is David stepping up to take on Goliath. And David walked forward. In some ways, if anyone like could have experienced some serious imposter syndrome, like I shouldn't be here. How can I be doing this? How am I the person that's been given this responsibility? Like I would think that he was the guy, but what he experiences is actually the opposite of that. Like he runs to the line, right, towards Goliath and like literally yells him down. So in some ways we could look at this and be like, well, is that literally the toxic positivity that we're advising people against? But if we actually read the passage, we actually did a whole podcast on like David versus Goliath as a display of healthy confidence. I think what we actually see is his confidence is not in himself. Like the reason why he's able to run to the line is because like he's like, you have not insulted me. You have not even insulted the Hebrew nation. You have insulted the God of heaven and earth, and he's going to give me your head, is what he says. And so it's like he's literally saying, this isn't about me. You think it's me standing against you right now? That's not who you're fighting right now. And I get why you would be laughing if you're fighting me, but you're not fighting me. I'm just the vessel. And I think that's the posture that we have to adopt if we want true, healthy, sustainable confidence is your confidence in your abilities. If so, it's going to fail every single time. If your confidence is in the God that you're serving, well, then I think you can literally run to the battle line. I get preachy on that answer a little
Run with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there another question that you wanted to make sure we got into on this topic?
I guess too, and it's shifting more into the practical side of things. Like how we've alluded a lot from, I think, a higher level to like, how do you solve for imposter syndrome? Like I think there are practical things that you could start doing, certainly, but I also think there is a mind shift that needs to happen before you even start taking those actions.
Can you start with the mind shift? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already alluded a lot to it and talked about it. I think really taking the time to understand your place in this world and in life through the lens of who is God and who has he said he is, and then what has he said about me and the world around us, and actually like taking the time to sit in that and reflect in it and just study his word. Like I think that some of the most profound things I think in my own life, growing beyond imposter syndrome, or in moments where I've felt like a fraud, or like I had to prove myself, or like I was going to be found out that I wasn't competent. The root of that was like returning to Jesus, returning to who he was, and understanding that like we are vessels. Like God is the ultimate authority, and in his sovereignty, like I can take whatever actions I want, but like ultimately I have arrived in this position. I have arrived with this influence, doing this job because God allowed that to happen. And so he wants me here for a reason. And that reason is both for my own personal development, sanctification, and also for the purpose of furthering the gospel.
Yeah. In that regard, it seems like there's a great deal of overlap, basically the way you think about and understand identity.
Mm-hmm.
I think identity, we could look at it through the lens of three questions, like who is God, who am I, and who are others, as very simple questions. And like starting with the first one, who is God? We shared this principle at an experience a while back, and it was so powerful for me to reflect on this. Your experience of God is always going to be dependent on your concept of God, right? And I have literally talked to people before that say, man, I really struggle to have a conversation like with God in prayer, just because like I don't know that I can trust, or like a God that is just like so wrathful and so angry, and it makes me feel shame for doing things wrong. And it's like, I don't know that I could trust that God either, because I don't think that's God, right? And like, I don't know where you got your concept of God, but I can tell you it's not the Bible, right? And like, there's a great book called Gentle and Lowly that really characterizes the thread of who God is throughout the totality of Scripture. And God is love, right? And what is love? Saint Thomas Aquinas defined love as to will the good of the other. So God is not just actively willing the good of the other, it's who he is. It is embedded in his being. And that's what we've got to remember. And the minute we more properly understand who God is, well, then we can go to the second question, which is, who am I? And there was a while back where I can't even remember how I got into this, but it's like I think that I was probably struggling with a little bit of attaching too much of my identity to achievements or to performance or things like that. And especially starting a small business, like performance is a roller coaster. And it's like, yeah, if you're starting a small business, it's a lot less stable than an existing business. And if one of the things that will quickly reveal is if you're attaching your identity to your performance, because then your identity is going to look a lot like your line graphs for the business, and that's rough, right? And so I think I had spent some time being like, I had diagnosed the problem and said, this isn't okay. And literally spent some time saying in prayer, like, who am I, like, according to the Bible? And like, let's just get like super simple. And I vividly remember like praying about it and like just coming to three conclusions that were very helpful, because I think they did what you said, which is like remind you of who you are in light of who God is. It's like, who am I? I'm a son of God, right? Who am I? I am a sinner. That is also biblically true, right? So I'm a son of God, I'm a sinner, and then also, who am I? I am someone he deemed worth saving. And then I was like, I don't know that I can think of a third point. Which is interesting. Like, if you're actually getting to the core of who you are, I think a lot of the things that we try to generate is the exact peacocking like you're talking about. Like, we generate all this accoutrement around us that looks really good, and we try to convince people this is who I am. And in reality, if you want to know who I am, I'm a son of God, I'm a sinner, and I was someone he deemed worth saving. But you want to talk about something that dramatically affects your leadership, is if you actually internalize those three identity statements, it has ramifications for everything you do, you know?
I mean, we go to redemption in our service every week, right? We do, and there's a time for worship, there's a time for confession, there's a time for hearing from the word, and then there's a time to take communion. And like all of those things, when you look at the core of what they are, I kind of identify those. It's those three categories,
for
right?
Sure.
Like confession, like I am a sinner in need of saving. Like, and then hearing from the word, like who does God say he is, and where do we go for that? Like we go to the Bible. And then from that we get to worship and partake in communion, which is an expression of salvation and being saved, right? And so just viewing it through that lens, like it makes sense that would be an important part of a service or a liturgy, because that is how we are realigning ourselves on a consistent basis with who God says we are.
Yeah. And which is so cool, because I think a lot of the common talk around imposter syndrome right now is actually just shallow feeling management. Like, it's like, oh, that's how you feel. Let's get you to feel a different way. But it's like, man, my feelings are so erratic and unpredictable, it's not even funny. And so I think why what we're talking about here is a lot more sustainable is because it's saying we're actually just going to take feelings out of the driver's seat in totality. Like, we're not going to allow feelings to be the thing that's driving the way you act, think, and live. We're going to put truth in the driver's seat. And so if we think about each of those things, like son of God, like, man, what does that imply? Or daughter of God, for that matter? That means like you are someone that has absurd creative potential, right? Like God is the God of creation, and it's like he made you in his own image, and like you have the ability to uncover the hidden swaths of potential in all of creation all around you. But also, what do you do for your son or daughter? You provide for them. So you are, because you're a son or a daughter, like you are provided for. That's part of your identity. You're protected, you're guided, you're looked after, right? Like that's part of who you are. And I think it's one of the reasons why, as I was kind of working on this, I was so excited about this particular conversation for leaders, is because it's like, man, leaders feel this burden of providing for, protecting, looking after so many people. Like you feel the burden of that. And I think that is being a good shepherd, right? But man, it sucks if that's your job description and you don't feel like anyone is shepherding you. Like that is awful. And what's so cool about this is if you have rooted your identity in being a son or daughter of God, you're like, this is what I get to do for others because I know. I don't think, I don't feel, I know this is what is done for me. And then we can go to like sinner. It's like, well, now you have a way to contextualize failure, brokenness, mistakes, and the fact that you're fallen. Is it's not this thing that you have to hide. It's not this thing that it makes you unable to do things for God or for others. It's just something that's part of the sinful nature of who you are. And then that brings us to the third one. You are worth saving, right? Like you are someone that God said, I love that kiddo, and I am going to sacrifice more than anything so that they would know that they are loved and they could live in right standing with me. And that's how we get to live. And that recontextualizes that identity statement of sinner as well. And oh my God, like, and I mean that literally, oh my God, like that changes the way you lead when you lead from that spot. But so let's talk practically then. If that's the identity we want to lead from, how do we make sure that's where we're coming from? From your, like, what does that look like practically?
I think so. Like you said, surrounding yourself with people who are in alignment with that, who are going to point you that direction, and letting them in enough that they can point you that direction when it's needed. I think often community is more shallow than we really want or need it to be, because we're not willing to let people in so they can actually shed light on how we're oriented, how we're living our lives, and the decisions we're making. So I think community is huge. I think I said this earlier. I mean, I genuinely just sitting in the word, like not to read the Bible in a year or cover as much as the word as possible, but just like read the word. And if something latches onto you, stop, like sit in it and listen and like mull over the realities of what God's word says. Cause I think that, I mean, the word transforms, like through the Holy Spirit, like the word will transform you. Meditating on it day and night, right? Third, there are like, and this is, I think this is an effect of common grace, like through psychology and through the world that we live in. Like there are resources and there are practices that you can do that, when done consistently, help change and reorient yourself to both the way that you see God and the way that you see yourself. And practically, I think one of the ones that was most impactful for me was honestly super simple. And I was seeing a therapist at the time, and she was like, I just want you to keep a gratitude journal. Like every night before you go to bed, write 5 things down that you're grateful for, big or small. And I mean, I did it for months and I still do it. Like, you talk about rewiring your brain. Like I'll do it in the car when I'm driving. Like I'll just start thinking of things I'm grateful for, and gratefulness. When I'm expressing that gratefulness to God specifically, is an incredible antidote to pride, which is like, if pride says it's all on me, I have accomplished this, it also says like any failure, any doubt, any feelings of inadequacy are also a 100% result of me. And so just the simple practice of practicing gratitude allows you to express that, like, hey, I have these things because God allows me to have them, and because He has designed me in this specific way that has given me these gifts or these connections, or I live in this specific area that I get to experience these blessings and these realities of the creation of the world that He created. And it does something to you when you do that on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the one that I would double click on there is the community piece, is because so much of imposter syndrome can be that pattern of feeling like, man, if they only knew, if they only knew. And what's the single best way to reinforce that line of thinking is just don't let anyone know. And then you're writing yourself a lie. Like, if they only knew what was true about me, I couldn't lead this company, I couldn't have this family, I couldn't be this successful. If they only knew. And then you keep it a secret. So there's no way for you to ever disprove. Like, you're not inviting other people in to disprove that lie that you are telling yourself, or that untruth that you're telling yourself. And, discussion around sin and practicing confession in your most intimate relationships, which I'm thinking like your 1 to 5 most intimate relationships is what I'll be teaching at this upcoming experience. Like, is there any undealt with hidden sin that you haven't received or extended grace for? And I think if the answer to that is yes, not only will you be experiencing imposter syndrome, it might actually be a flag that it's like you have some work to do in living in integrity. To go back to your original definition. But what's so powerful and cool is like, I mean, Aspen and I literally have conversations that start with, it feels so formal, but it's like, I have something that I want to confess to you. And it's like, oh, like that sounds like such a big word. Now it's just very normalized to us, right? But it's like we share that. And, when you have a relationship where the person looks at you and that's like, oh, and their reaction isn't that I have 4 eyes, or isn't that like, well, you need to shut down Path for Growth immediately, right? But rather their reaction is like, oh man, I'm sorry that you're struggling with that. And like, know that I'm going to pray for you. Know that this doesn't change the fact that I love you and I forgive you. And then, we make a practice of asking like, how can I help? How can I help in that? What does that look like? And oh my gosh, then if you got those people that help you recontextualize the things in your life that you are most likely to tell yourself lies about, you can see why Paul was so bold and so brash, because he was living wide open, right? He's like, there's nothing about what I have done that y'all don't know about. And therefore, like, I'm going to move forward because I've been saved by grace. And now I get to go extend that grace to other people. And so it's why genuine, authentic, transparent, vulnerable community is so critically important for leaders in particular. Is there anything else you want to make sure we talk about in this conversation?
No, I think we're out of time, so that's part of it. But I think that's a great note to end on. So
cool. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.